Welcome back. Niger now has a new military leader following the shocking coup in the Sahel country. Abdurrahman Chiani, the head of Niger's presidential guard, has named himself head of a transitional government in the West African nation after his unit overthrew democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum last Wednesday. The coup happened just over a week after Nigerian President Bola Tinubu hosted Mr. Bazoum and two other presidents, that of Benin and Guinea-Bissau, in Abuja in his capacity as the chair of Ecowas Authority of Heads of State and Government. Now, part of their agenda at the meeting was setting up a standby force to counter terrorism and stop military coups in the sub-region. So it's a bit of an irony that President Bazoum would be overthrown from office shortly after this meeting took place. But now President Tinubu and the Ecowas leadership face a huge challenge on how to respond to this coup. For starters, that standby force has not been set up, and even putting boots on the ground in Niger could be a very tricky move. In the meantime, 62-year-old Chiani has said he staged the coup to avoid, quote, the gradual and inevitable demise of the country. Niger's borders, I should say, are still closed. The nationwide curfew is in place, and all institutions of government have been suspended. The soldiers have warned against any foreign intervention, adding that they'll respect captive President Bazoum's well-being. The coup is the fifth successful one in the landlocked country since it gained independence from France, and it is the seventh in West and Central Africa since 2020. We've seen coups in Mali, Guinea, and of course Burkina Faso, with military government still in place in those countries. Ecowas has, of course, been talking tough over the latest coup in Niger, but what options does it really have? Joining me now to explore that is Achiketu Chude, an African affairs analyst. Achike, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Ecowas has called a meeting for Sunday in Abuja. What kind of response do you expect to see from Ecowas?
I think the situation is going to be very dicey. Obviously, the new ECOWAS chairman has talked about intolerance for military coups. And just like you said in your opener, just barely a few days after he made that statement, we had a coup just very close by, somebody who had just visited him. And so it's going to be a very tough one. Do not forget that there has been a flurry of activities by ECOWAS, most especially in other international bodies, to stem the tide of coups in the West African sub-region in the past few years. And so this has obviously continued unabatedly. And but before now, before Buhari left office, there was this discussion about the possibility of having an intervention force in West Africa. And Tinubu, had now talked about it recently. So perhaps they will be looking at it. But they are just too, apart from the fact that it will be tricky to put boots on the ground, apart from the fact that it is going to be a matter, it's going to take a lot of resources to be able to do that, there's another third factor that has to be considered. The goings on right now in Niger Republic, where the people themselves have taken a position against the political class and attacking some politicians, I think it's a very, very big problem that the ECOWAS leaders will have to, talk about.
But we've also seen in Niger. Yes. I mean, you're right. We've seen demonstrations for and against the coup, because we've also seen supporters of the president protest, and we can see the political parties would appear to be rallying round. Coming together, all of them condemning the coup, describing it as suicidal and all of that. Do you think it would make any difference at all?
That is what makes it tricky and complex.
Because what we can see is that it appears General Tiani is now beginning to consolidate his hold on power.
Yes, exactly what I'm saying, that it makes the whole thing more tricky and complex. Don't forget that when the Guinean coup took place, that the military junta had support from the civilian populace, even from civil society organizations. And so there is no way ECOWAS is going to meet and to discuss this without also factoring in some of these things we are talking about. The support that the junta is having, and then the opposition that the junta is having. For as long as you have a divided populace, it will be difficult for ECOWAS to take a decision, either to put boots on the ground. They must factor this thing in, and they must factor it. And then that is why I'm saying it's going to be a little bit complex, especially because of that. Of course, nobody is talking about, we have always agreed that military intervention in politics is an aberration to democracy. But what has worried me over the years is the fact that African leaders seem to have taken this issue of bad governance or misgovernance in the subcontinent and in Africa itself. They seem to have taken it with a pinch of salt. Now, obviously, people are beginning to respond in a very strong way that they will also not tolerate bad governance. But that is not an excuse for military
But let's be candid. Is this just about a response to bad governance? I mean, President Bazoum has been there just since 2021, probably less than 3 years in power. He's been quite popular in that country, and then the military has used the issue of insecurity and bad governance as an excuse. We saw that as an excuse in Burkina Faso. We saw it in Mali. And you look at these countries. I mean, since the military took over in these countries, what has changed? I mean, things have even gotten worse.
No, look. I mean, it's clear. We're on the same page. The reality is that all of these things are excuses. Even when we're having a spate of military coups in Nigeria here, it was the same reason of misgovernance, the same reason of... And then now you're also factoring in the insurgency that's going on in the West Africa, especially in the Sahel region, which they are also using as a basis to provide justification for military coups. There's nothing that can justify military adventurism in the political development of nations, because it has a way of stulting or stultifying democracy. Democracy is something that comes, as a result of, trials, experimentations over time. The experiences people have from democracy, especially in developing countries, are usually not good. But again, there is a study that shows that transitioning democracies often face all kinds of issues. And if they are not handled, there could be crisis, of conflict in those countries. This is proven. But the answer or the response is not military adventurism, because it is all about a certain class of military, people within the military hierarchy taking advantage of the fact that they exercise control, over the use of guns and using it to, undermine and intimidate the civilian political leadership. And what we see ultimately as the outcome is never an outcome that the people desire. Because after years of experimentation, transitioning and all that by the military to go back to the civilian, because eventually it must get to that level where they realize they can no longer hold on to power. By that time, a lot of damage would have been done to those countries. And so these are some of the issues.
Now, look, Niger has experienced a series of coups in the past. I mean, this is the 5th one. But you look at this coup, quite unexpected. Do you think the military guy, the presidential guy, General Tiani, so to speak, drew inspiration from the coups in Mali and Burkina Faso to stage this?
Obviously. I mean, obviously, it started with one and then cascaded to another one and then another one. And then we see this flurry of diplomatic activities by Ecowas, the imposition of sanctions on some of these regimes, and it would appear that they were not sufficiently cowed, and they played around, the situation in those places. We have seen what is going on in Guinea, how they tried to subvert even the best efforts of Ecowas. We have seen the same thing in Mali and all that, giving themselves extended timeline for return to democracy. When they are approaching that timeline, they also extend it and all that. So we have seen this. So it is because there has not been something definitive, something that, I mean, in terms of being able to forcefully reverse these military coups. It is what has emboldened other military adventurers from other West African countries. And the reality is that somebody has said that once a crime goes unpunished, the heart of the people is filled with rebellion. So the punishment, the right punishment has not been meted out to the military adventurers. And you see the people, other militaries in other West African countries being emboldened to do the same thing because they derive profit from what is going on. And that is personal aggrandizement. That is satiation of certain economic interest. That is what all of this thing is all about. It's about the person. It's about the clique of people who get to, who take over power and their access to the resources of the state. That's what this whole thing is all about. But, even while the ECOWAS is intervening in whatever way, they must also emphasize on the need for more responsible and responsive, civilian governance in their countries. They must also, it is also important to also do that while holding these military adventurers absolutely responsible for what they have done.
Let me ask you this final question. Do you think ECOWAS can succeed in reversing the situation in Niger?
So, do
you think ECOWAS can succeed this time in reversing the situation in Niger? I mean, since it failed in Burkina
it's going
Faso
to be very
Mali.
difficult. I can tell you it's going to be very difficult. It's not impossible. I think that ECOWAS has the capacity, if they are willing to make the sacrifices that are required, sacrifices in terms of resources, sacrifices in terms of, deployment of men, sacrifices in the sense that some of these countries are plagued by all manners of economic crisis, and then, you also have their armed forces also being involved in maintaining order in their countries because of the insurgency and all manners of violence that is going on in those countries. In the Sahel region, in Nigeria, we are also seeing it. So you have a situation where the Nigerian army is stretched tight, is really stretched because of the various operations they are undertaking in theaters of conflict. We have that with other West African countries. But again, if you want to send a message, then perhaps you have to dig deep and be able to muster the resources that is needed to put the specter of coups behind us. Perhaps they can also go to the international community who are also suffering from some level of donor fatigue and hope to get some kind of positive response in terms of resources that will be used for that purpose. But I tell you, one thing I will tell you is that if ECOWAS decides to do this, I can tell you that about 75% of the resources that will be needed in terms of financial resources and men will come from Nigeria. That is the experience we had with ECOMOG in both Sierra Leone and Liberia. So Nigeria must be able to brace up for that if that is a decision that is taken.
All right, Achike, just before we go, I just have to ask you this. Look, you look at Niger, it's a very poor country, one of the poorest, if not the poorest in the world. You look at the UN Human Development Index, Niger usually ranks last. This is a country that is dealing with a very serious humanitarian crisis. It has one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. This is a country where poverty is rife. This is a country where, is dealing with serious terrorism issues. You just look at all of these development indices. Niger does not just rank anywhere at all. And then you ask yourself, these military guys who have decided to strike, did they actually think this through? Do they really understand the enormity of the challenge they are taking on?
No, they don't care. They don't care. Look, I've already tried to establish that it is about themselves. It's not about the country. It's not about the people. It's simple. We must call it by its name. These are a group of, military adventurers or misadventurists, whatever you call them, or whatever you can call them. One has to use very strong words to them because it's not about patriotism. It's not about duty, to the state. It's not about concern for the welfare and the well-being of the people of Niger or Niger itself. It's all about this has happened in other West African countries, and we also are capable of also doing the same thing. For as long as you have the gun, and this is a typical case of gun of might is right. That is exactly what is happening. And so I understand the pictures you are painting about Niger Republic. It's in a very dire situation, but unfortunately, most unfortunately, they do not care. It's all about personal gratification. It's all about satiating parochial, economic interests. That's what this whole thing is all about.
Achike Chude, African Affairs Analyst, thank you very much for joining us on the program, and thank you for your insights.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that's how much we can take on the program this week. We thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.